Welcome to the HPTV podcast. I'm Mitchell here with my co-hosts Jamie and Steven, ready to dive into The Chamber of Secrets. We've all watched the film recently with an eye towards season 2 of the new series, which we don't have anything on, but there were a couple good little rumors this week. We saw Phoebe Waller-Bridge, her name out there for Petunia, and Cillian Murphy as not Voldemort, which he was, of course, talked about for, but Quirrell, which is kind of a good idea because those are big names and there'd be small time commitments. I'm a big fan of Fleabag, but I don't know. What do you guys think about those faces and matching up with those roles and that kind of idea of maybe bigger actors, smaller parts, and then we get some lesser knowns who are going to put in the decade of work?
I mean, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I do like her. I feel like she looks a lot like the Petunia from the movies. And not that that's a bad thing, but I just almost feel like it'd be good to kind of have, I don't know, a different approach to some of those folks. But I think she'd do a good job at it. And you're right. I think it's similar. Like, it's a small time commitment. Right? Well, in each movie, but in the season, she might have, a couple of weeks worth of work per season or something like that, right? And so it'd be kind of a cool way for her to be involved.
I kind of like her. I think, I like her in general. I think she's a really good actress. I love Fleabag. I think that's one of the top 10 shows of all time. But she works for me because she's kind of how I imagine Petunia. And my imagination of both of them is really based off Matilda. I don't know why. That's where my brain went to. Like, very similar, like start to the story. And my head goes to the movie. So, like, her being kind of tall and like kinky, I think works for me. I do kind of want whoever they cast as Lily to I don't want them looking too much alike, but like just a little more familiar than what we had in the movies where they don't look at all like they are at all related. So I don't know. I like that. Cillian. I don't love him as Quirrell. I got the Voldemort thing that a lot of people are doing, but I didn't think he would commit to that. And I really don't think it's his thing to do I don't know, maybe it is a franchise like this and committing to several seasons. But Quirrell, to me, I think has to come off more like you feel bad for him. It has to be a little more trickery around that for me. I don't know.
Cillian's just a really good actor, so I think he could pull off being like a stammering, annoying, kind of insecure guy. And he's kind of done some mainstream stuff. Remember, he did Batman Begins, which is underrated, and he was also in one of my favorite bad movies, which is called In Time, starring Justin Timberlake. He's the villain in that, and I think he could do it. But again, if he did Voldemort, it would be a big time commitment. Weirdly, not for a few years, although it'd be interesting if they use like an aged-down version of him, because, we're going to have to get some Voldemort across time. The interesting thing about Petunia is she's supposed to be fairly young when Harry's 11. She still would only be 32, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge could play that, but it's interesting how she would age along. And then Lily, if they got someone who kind of look like her, should really be in her very early 20s for all the flashbacks, and you'd think her ghost and Goblet and everything would be that age. But I think they could both do it, but if not, I don't know. That could hurt the budget. The other thing is, I was watching this thing today about I sent you guys the YouTube link about the evolution of Hogwarts and how the set changed drastically, and they didn't really use 3D modeling that much until the end, which is interesting because it was around. But if we're going to spend a lot of money, I'd much rather have practical sets and consistency and really use that technology expense up front rather than paying actors. But if they were fans, if they were willing to do it for a reasonable fee, look at me, I'm just thinking of the budget for this $1 billion
now red line
company.
It just got you.
I'm looking out for the profit loss category. But two really good, obviously, performers that would be fun to have in the world. You're right, she does kind of look like Fiona Shaw. And I will say, I didn't really know anything about Fiona Shaw and hadn't really seen her in much since Harry Potter. And now I swear she's popping up everywhere. And she plays the perfect, most annoying person in the second season of Bad Sisters, which is an Apple series by Sharon Horgan. So, but she's also played like a sweet, nice person in things. I'm like, oh, she's really good. And all I knew her as was Petunia for the longest time. So you never know.
My mind always goes to, isn't she in Three Men and a Little Lady? That's just
like
the only reference I had. I mean, obviously I was like really young when this movie came out. That's all I had seen her in before. And so it was kind of funny.
Wasn't that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny to think back that where she's no, I think you make a really good point about Cillian and just others in general, is that that's something I thought about, not in this movie actually, tied to Lockhart, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but just there has to be that that lulling in of this is someone you feel bad for with Quirrell, right? Or this is someone who you believe, in the case of Lockhart, is actually this attractive, guy that all these people actually believe. And I didn't get that in the second movie. We'll talk about it, but I do think that's in with Quirrell. I think that you didn't quite get enough of that in the first movie, and the second. But being a series, I mean, with a whole season, right? I think there's a lot more time to develop that, like that pity almost for him, right? And then to have that turn at the end, I think that makes it much more emotional and meaningful impact of the characters. They pull that off.
Well, having someone like Phoebe or Killian in these like smaller roles would be nice to like legitimize the whole series and draw people in more. And I think it's smart to do that with these small roles. I don't know. I just don't like. I've seen pretty much. What's it called? Is it Red Eye?
Yeah.
What's the one? Yeah, Red Eye. And like Oppenheimer, I'm thinking of movies where he's like not the villain. I mean, isn't he eventually the villain in that movie? But like he's playing nice. I just don't like it's either like he's charming, kind of sly, or he's like the villain, which he does great at. I just don't see it. But I do think throwing really good known character actors in these roles would help the series as a whole and get people interested in watching.
Well, we'll get to Lockhart and how I think he was properly annoying, but also he needs to be charming. You have to believe that people believe him. And another really good character actor in Chamber of Secrets is Miriam Margolyes, who plays Professor Sprout. Like, she is fantastic. I read her book last year, and she's hilarious. And anytime you see her on Graham Norton, it is worth looking up on YouTube, her interviews on Graham Norton.
And she's very concerned about us mentally who are still obsessed with Harry Potter.
There's something wrong with us. People still are interested in Harry Potter. So
everyone's,
but she'd enjoy that. She would.
Well, and everyone sends me that clip, and I'm like, whatever, that's fine. Yeah. Worry about it.
She doesn't really care. It's fine.
She was funny.
If you're really worried, I'll post my Venmo on here and help us out with some funds.
We'll get some other hobbies.
Promise to use it for therapy or something.
We can't afford
them. Cruises count as therapy, right? We can do that.
Yeah. We'll get to our Harry Potter cruise next. No, I'm just kidding. Let's go into the sorting hat, which is let's sort this film in its ranking among all of the. We're doing the film just where it ranks in your, not necessarily just as an adaptation or as your favorite or as your best, kind of an amalgamation of where does this stand in your ultimate ranking of Harry Potter films?
I did like a whole thing because I was trying to figure out my ranking, comparing each movie to each movie, right? And surprisingly, number 2 ended up in 5th place. 5th place for me. It might change as we go through the other movies, but it's toward the bottom. I thought it would be lower, to be perfectly honest, but it did
5th. So I'm gonna switch up what I said last week. I think I said Sorcerer. I said 4th or 5th. I actually now would move this ahead of Sorcerer after watching it. I know, Mitchell. I know. So I think this would be 5th, and Sorcerer would be 6th.
Well, I'm gonna be the hater of this episode because it's a solid 8. It's not even close. It's not even close.
It's my 7th book.
Like, it's not bad. It maintains a lot of good continuity from 1 to 2. And again, like, Sorcerer's Stone went up in my estimation after my last viewing. And this one, I was kind of bored. I guess I'm not the most Halloween-y person. Like, the fact that it's kind of around all the death and the ghosts and that sort of mystery. I'm like going to be so excited about whatever they do with the show that I'm sure I'll be anticipating each new bit I get. But I'm going to be so much less excited for this. I'm almost curious how they're going to make this more interesting. But it's 2 hours and 40 minutes. I watched it. Netflix lets you watch at higher speeds, which I don't think should be allowed on streaming services that aren't YouTube. And I did. I watched it at 1.25 and 1.5 for portions of it.
That's crazy.
And I know it so well. Maybe that's part of the problem. And I just get frustrated by some different elements of it. I've always just not enjoyed it. And there's some bits and pieces, but I just think it doesn't do anything to enhance the story. It's not one I look forward to rewatching. I was thinking, I don't know, because I've said I'm not going to rewatch these movies for a long time after this rewatch. I don't know when am I ever going to watch the Chamber of Secrets again.
It's like the key to so much later on. It's just hard because it doesn't really pay off until the last book. But I think we should talk about overall. I will say most people I know who are Potter fans, this is their least favorite book. And I think just before we get into the movie more, I do think there's a lot around that it is very dark compared to the first book. And I felt the same. I mean, I was a kid. I read Goosebumps all the time. I read like Fear Street, like all that kind of stuff. This book legit scared me as a kid, like the snake and stuff. And I think it was just such a leap from going to like this magical world that was like saving Harry to the place that he found safety in and all that, even though there was, you know, a teacher there trying to kill him. I do think that all of a sudden it became this unsafe place where there's literally something in the walls attacking kids and all that stuff that maybe turned me off a bit to it. But now I don't know, the last couple of years I've been trying to come to terms with Chambers, and I actually kind of give it a little more credit than what I saw as a kid, but we can't like dismiss that initial reaction that most people had to. And it wasn't like hated. It just was like, oh. And then throughout the series, it just still kind of stayed at the bottom there. What I appreciated about the movie was overall the execution of the pacing and the transitions compared to the first one.
I was interested. I was going to say, what did they do better in this film than they did in the last one? I actually think Daniel Radcliffe is a little bit better, and he's kind of asked to play some different notes. And there's some fun sequences, but I remember reading this and really liking when Harry and Ron get into the car, and they give Ron some comedy to work with. Obviously, I hate the spiders, but it moves pretty well. It's actually one of the better adapted ones, again, because it's short, and we'll talk about a couple of the big sequences they left out. I don't know what it is that just it doesn't carry the charm. I remember J.K. Rowling kind of famously said there was a parent who wrote in and was like, this is too dark. We love the first book, but you can't make them dark. They're not going to be for children. And J.K. Rowling was like, well, sucks to suck because it's only going to get more serious from here because the kids get older. But even though he deals with time travel and werewolves and like a prisoner that's literally stalking to kill Harry, and the fourth, which I think is a little bit more levity, but it ends really dark. There's something about this one in the tone that it takes, but maybe I don't like the movie and it's actually overshadowing some of the book, and I need to reread the book again and see if I take a little bit more from it.
Well, I think the key is what Jamie said. It's that you're taking this place that we've made very safe, right? Hogwarts, like there's no safer place than Hogwarts, literally, right? From the first. And we're like, oh wait, but there's like murderous gigantic snakes in the walls. We're just here the whole time and we didn't know, and now they're gonna kill people. Like, I think that's part of where, for me, it makes it so much darker, because in the first movie it's kind of like, okay, there was this object being protected, so they put these things on there, and a bad person came into the castle after that, right? It's very different, so that it's kind of leaves like, what else is here? Like, if there's this ancient history, for me, I think that really like created this environment that was like, oh shoot, like why are they putting kids in this castle? And yeah, it doesn't get any lighter going forward, I feel like, in many ways. Like you said, the fourth book, it seems like it's going to, and then it goes real dark at the end.
And just overall, it's kind of one note in that tone most of the book. I mean, starting from when Dobby comes in, which, I mean, most of us disliked Dobby a lot when he first came in because he's just ruining things for Harry. I mean, and there's obviously moments of levity. It's fun that like they drive the car and all that stuff, but like it's pretty like uncomfortable, I want to say, the whole time as a kid, where you're like, why is all this happening? Like, where's like the levity and like the happy moments? There's not like a ton of that.
That is one good note I put about the movie, though, is I feel like there were more interjections of humor, like Ron and the spider thing. Like some of that, I remember having some really good laughs in the theater the first time, but yeah, maybe the books doesn't do that as well. I'm trying to remember now that I've, rewatched the movie. I got to go back and reread the book so I can compare the two. I just, there's not that humor, I don't feel like.
Yeah, and there's some bright spots. Like, I do think things like the herbology lesson, which is essential to the plot, but also gives you a moment of character and a moment of comedy. I think that's something they could do in the TV show, is make us feel like we're in year 2 with these kids at school and we're having fun with them. I do think, yeah, there needs to be some levity, because even things that they left out, the Death Day party, also not encouraging. Huge deal to leave that out. I don't think it was necessary. They leave out Valentine's Day. They leave out Professor Binns, Justice for History of Magic.
Well, Justice for Ghosts. That was my thing. I was like, I'm going to have to be a ghost advocate. Like, they cut so much of the ghost stuff out, which is such a big part of this movie.
Still no Peeves. I'll just say it. Come on, people. I mean, we know it never happens, but
yeah, and that could be a moment of levity, or like them being bored in a history of magic class. And I think they use Transfiguration to essentially have that same conversation. And I get that that's something that you need to like feed throughout. That is something that in a movie really did make sense to chop, was history of magic. But I hate that it's everyone's least favorite subject, because I think I'd like it. Reading about all the Goblin rebellions, I'm all in. Yeah, it's just little bits. I was thinking like Percy needs to be a better developed character. He could be really fun to hate, and he gets this really brief moment in this one. And there's just, yeah, so many things that
we're we're already kind of going there. So let's go into the Howler and complain about, the changes.
Oh, sorry, I kind of jumped right into that.
Right, we're there already. So just officially now we're in there. So
speaking of the Howler, the actual design and execution of the Howler, fantastic.
I thought that's one of my notes about one of the things they did really well.
Sorry,
really cool.
Now I'm jumping ahead again.
Jeez, Mitchell, stay on topic here. No, so what would you guys say, Jamie? What did you say was one of the worst, or maybe the worst change or omission?
My worst was the Death Day party, which really I understand why they did it again. It has nothing to do really moving on with the series, but I think it's just such a cool part of the book for me. I love that kind of stuff. I am a Halloween-y person. It makes me mad that they meet. Like, I would never skip out on all that good food to go to that. But that was the biggest thing for me. But I do think there's some things for the series. Again, they didn't know all what was going to happen, but I feel like there was no note at the beginning. Was there? Did they get an owl after Dobby dropped the cake?
No.
I feel like that's missing a lot because that comes into play, especially book 5. I don't like that Dobby drops the cake on her head. Although in the book, I've always said that if I were Harry and Dobby was about to do that, I would just run in my room and be like, I don't know what happened. You must have had it on the edge of the counter. I don't know. Or the fridge, wherever she had it. Arthur and Lucius fight. I don't like that that's gone. Planting squibs in general. And this is also just a personal thing, is I know what day it is when Dudley says that to Harry because it's Harry's birthday. And they don't mention that until they're in the car. And Ron's like, happy birthday, Harry.
Well, that first chapter is called The Worst Birthday Ever, isn't it? Like, we should get Harry feeling isolation and like he's been rushed. It is a reset, a very classic reset in a book that he had this magical year and then all of a sudden he's back in this dreary place and he feels so disconnected. I think we need to feel that. And then going back to Hogwarts, he flies in a car, and even though it's like through difficult circumstances, we should feel reinvigoration of that magic. But again, the Dursleys need time. We kind of need to see Harry back in that mindset before he comes back to Hogwarts and kind of gets back into gear with school and everything.
You should feel so bad for this kid, but they kind of just skip. I mean, they obviously do like just stay in your room, all that kind of stuff, but I don't know. You still got to remember he's a little boy, and they don't even say
one of those things. If you stop and think about just the abuse that he suffers there at their house, and it's kind of just glossed over. And it's like, I did actually make note of that, is that we got a full 8 minutes in the Muggle world before Harry is picked up by the Weasleys and whisked off, right? And so when you think about 2 hours and 40 minutes, I get that. You have to move the story along. But at the same time, it's kind of like, hey, but this is, again, like you said, we're resetting. This is Harry's base world, and going back into the magical world is its own deal. The thing that I put as the worst change is a really small line, actually. But I remember as a kid when I saw this movie the first time, this line ruined a lot of things for me for the rest of the Harry Potter series. All right, and so it's not Hermione's line. Hermione says a line. It's right after they find Mrs. Norris and everything, right? And you're accusing Harry. And Harry almost says, but doesn't say that he heard a voice, right? And so Hermione says, even in the wizarding world, hearing voices is not a good sign. And so I think that's interesting in and of itself, just because up until this point, anything is possible in the magical world, right? All of these things are happening, but hearing voices, still bad, right? And then you learn a bit more about kind of squibs and some of the other what's the word, prejudices and stuff, right? But right after that, there is a portrait right next to them that says, she's right, or something like that. And right then I remember thinking hang on, there's a portrait right there. There's portraits everywhere. So how is it that they don't know who petrified Mrs. Norris? And so for me, that kind of world expansion just is there's eyes everywhere. So everything that happens, and as I start thinking forward to the other books, book 3, and who broke into the Gryffindor common room and all that kind of stuff. Maybe the fat lady couldn't say, but he must have passed 1,000 other portraits on his way, and they can all talk. So what are you guys doing here? And so for the rest of the movie, all that kind of stuff, all the mystery, all the fact finding and detective work was just go talk to the freaking portraits, you guys. Come on. And so Dumbledore should have just done that. It would have been over in 10 minutes, right? So they shouldn't have added that.
What's in the pipes, Stephen? What are you talking about?
Well, but it had to come out of the pipes in order to get Mrs. Norris, right? It was in the hallway for at least a second, and they were all right there.
They should have had a portrait person get petrified.
A lot
of peace.
Petrify all the portraits.
Teach them to open their mouths, right? You shut up.
I will say, so the world does expand a little bit here. We kind of get a little bit of information about the founders. We get information about one thing I think they kind of use parcel tongue, Steve, instead of saying it's weird to hear voices. They kind of say, oh, like you being able to speak parcel tongue is super strange. But yeah, that actual line in the book is a great line and a great way to say it. And yeah, we kind of have this idea that Dumbledore is so invincible, and they say in the first book there's no safer place than Hogwarts, but they fall apart real quickly in this one. So those breadcrumbs from the book they actually set up more things than you think of. Like even when Joe wrote this, Joe, first name basis, like there were a lot of threads that kind of there's not big threads that get dropped. I'd say there's breadcrumbs that might not, but there's a lot of breadcrumbs that do pay off. But it is interesting to see what they could keep that we'd be able to see and focus on later on. I think those would be more interesting to take up our time. Yeah, I just don't know how to make it more fun. I don't know.
And I think too, again, back to the book, but also the movies, there's just a lot of like decisions made that even when I was a kid, I was like, why did they take the car? Why didn't they just wait for the Weasleys to come out? Like, like how McGonagall says that to them and stuff. Like, but there are, like you're talking about the portraits, there's just a few of those like kind of plot hole-ish things. And that maybe as adults, we're just seeing it even more. Then I'm like, oh yeah, why are we doing this? Why aren't we, talking to Dumbledore, who you like pray, like where it does explain that more in the book, but it's hard to like get out of some of those things. And I think that's just overall why it's kind of like irks you.
There's like a crossroads of, I can excuse Harry not telling Dumbledore that he's hearing voices because he's insecure about it, which does not come across very well in the movie. I can kind of let that go. And part of it is also just, some things are just not going to happen because it's a story and they can't have the easy solution that we might think is there. And sometimes those are harder to forgive and sometimes easier, especially when you feel like it is so well written overall that you see those little solutions. I mean, we'll talk about a big one when we get to Goblet of Fire, but you just have to kind of accept those plot devices or the imperfections of your characters at times because they move the plot forward. And I just think they get frustrating.
Well, one of my hopes for the series, right, is that because they have the time, I would hope that they can take those things that feel contrived and make them feel less so, right? Sometimes you can add a line or add, a 15-second like scene here to like, for example, maybe there's a legitimate reason why they couldn't wait for the Weasleys to come out, right? Maybe they could insert that into the story in order to make it make sense. Book 4, yeah, I mean, even the book, and I feel like the movie made it less realistic, right? They made it more obvious that like something was very weird there and like Dumbledore should have picked up on it a long time ago. And so it's like I would rather they made it, less contrived. So hopefully there's one thing they can do in the series. It'd be to take some of those contrived things and reduce that.
But also the overall vibe, it just feels very 90s books. Like it's just like the books we read when we were kids where it's like, there's an evil teacher and this is like, that's just what was popular too, so it kind of fits into the zeitgeist of the time as well, and it reminds me of that, which I kind of like too.
Yeah, there's some nostalgia to it. Let's go to the pensive and maybe spin this slightly more positively. Well, kind of. What are some things that we think they did right, or maybe that they just could have? How did I phrase it?
Changes that could have been easy changes that could have been made,
or things that did go right. So because a couple of the bits that we said they omitted, they could have been woven out in fairly seamlessly. I really like when they get in trouble at the very beginning. Professor McGonagall brings them a reloading plate of sandwiches, and I think that could have been included because I always dreamed of having a plate of BLTs that just reloaded itself whenever I finished.
Something that really bothers me about this movie is Hermione's hair and Malfoy's hair, and maybe at the time wigs weren't as great, but I'm like, I feel like wigs would have been just such a solution for this stuff. Like his hair's like yellow because it's like they got the bleach. I don't know how the toner was back then. I don't even know if you guys know what that is, boys, to take that like orangish out of it. It's like you could see his roots are so white compared. It just bothers me. And her hair, it's just like, let's 3-barrel curl this to make her hair bigger, which are just silly things. But like, I feel like those could have been like easy fixes that take you less out of the world. And I just feel like building up Lockhart more and his charm, like the fact that like Mrs. Weasley is kind of obsessed with him, and even Hermione, they don't play that up as much. So you kind of just think I think we think that in the book too, that he's kind of smarmy the whole time, but like you don't even understand why they're like charmed by him because he's just an idiot.
They need to make him a little bit hotter too. Like they went for like this Hugh Grant British weirdly I just have charm, and it just wasn't there. So you can just make him physically hotter. It's fine.
That was I mean, I've never been the best judge of what makes a man attractive, but I know looking at that guy that he's just not all that attractive.
Well,
and I guess
I am a good judge because I have a mirror, and they are a lot of people. A lot of people
just casting himself.
Have suggested the guy from Bridgerton who thought he was too good for Bridgerton and then hasn't done anything good since.
Reggae, what's his last name? Reggae something.
Oh, the guy from who was only in season 1.
Yeah,
I could see that
and
too.
Then he was in Dungeons and Dragons where he kind of took the piss out of himself, and that was quite funny. Renee Rajan Page, that's it.
Well, I kind of imagine. Okay, so I imagined a Hugh Grant type, but I've never found Hugh Grant attractive. But like Hugh Grant's charm, like the fact that Hugh Grant, to me, not to put down Hugh Grant, but that he is so charming. I mean, he plays really charming characters in real life. He's kind of funny, and I love the self-realization that he's having now at this stage in life. But despite that, I'm like, he's not that cute. But if there was like someone with that charm and good looks, and I do think, what's that guy, Sam, whatever, he's in Hunger Games Catching Fire. He's like I
know who you're talking about. He plays Finnick.
Finnick, yes.
Yeah, he's hot. I could do. Yeah, I can't remember.
And he's like, but he already did that in Catching Fire, or like played this like charming kind of.
You can do it again. He was in Daisy Jones and the Six.
Sam Claflin,
he was really good. Yeah.
I mean, he did good, but I was disappointed by that series compared to the book.
I enjoyed it. I didn't read the book, so
oh, okay, yeah.
That made it.
Anyway, but part of it is also just, I think part of it again is just time. It's like, I don't know, they were able to say, okay, we need to give Lockhart this scene in order to kind of establish that it was all very boom, 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 like they do with so many things, and a lot of it is over the top, right? You get some of that stage acting kind of thing going on, and so I feel like it was kind of just thrown at you, like, hey, just accept that this guy's really hot and everyone believes him and wants him, and then move on. And I didn't buy into it.
And I don't know if this is an easy change that could have been made, but I just said overall making it feel like a whodunit and playing up Jenny more. Like, it's never like, you never have a thought really besides like them showing her in one shot where they're talking about it. It's like, what's going on with her was never really a question in my mind. So those were mine.
They could start building her up as a person with a personality immediately and put in every scene she has in the book, make it way more interesting. You kind of get also Colin Creevey, who he needs to be in this and the DA. We need to care when he dies, like we care when Dobby dies. He's a very similar character in that he's naive and obsessed with Harry. I think that could be built up and like almost something like, it is interesting that Harry and the trio are no longer the youngest year. It is interesting that Ginny and Colin they're now bright-eyed and they're involved and they're both integral to the plot. Him obviously getting petrified and everything. I think if they give a little bit more time there, like that, and that it could have been done quite quickly to dip in and out of moments, but with the TV series, I hope it's done better than quickly. Whereas like the fight between Lucius and Arthur, for that to have kind of gone to some fisticuffs, wouldn't have taken that much time.
Punch.
But
knock over one shelf.
Here's my hot take, because I love Jason Isaacs and I think he looks great as Lucius. I actually don't think he's doing a good job acting.
Don't tell him that.
I won't, because I adore him.
I adore him too.
I like the wand and the cane, and he is playing an over the top villain, but I was like, oh, this actually doesn't intrigue me that much. And he kind of detests Draco and that father-son dynamic. I think that's something else they could build up. I do not want Draco built up too much in this TV series because people already think he's too redeemable and want him to be like this sex symbol.
Tom Felton is so sweet.
He's a charming man, but I want Draco people to be like, oh, he's a bully because he comes from a toxic background, but he's a bad person.
And to defend Jason Isaacs a little bit, I feel like he, for one, did that because it's like a children's movie, and the bad is
maybe we should have that. I don't want it in the ether that I insulted Jason Isaacs.
No, but I also get what you're saying. But I also appreciate that he clearly took it to heart. Like he
did, yeah, man.
He took it seriously, which I feel like some adults in the series kind of maybe just phoned it in because it's like, oh, I'm just doing this kid's movie. And then later on kind of upped it when they realized like what it was. But I do think it's a bit over the top. I concur.
Because I used to say that he would have been one of my favorite, like, and very accurate portrayals. And he does good because, I mean, even in Deathly Hallows, the way he just looks like gaunt and he is Voldemort's little bitch, like, it does work in the end.
I did insult Robbie Coltrane last time, so
you did.
You're much better off.
Oh, speaking of Robbie Coltrane, though, Sorry, one of my other things they could have, like, why didn't we get more Hagrid in this movie? With as long a runtime as there was, I really, like, we care about him going to Azkaban because we got to see so much of him in the first movie, I feel like. But he's, like, barely in this movie, I felt like. And so that was my one thing. It wouldn't be that hard to include some more Hagrid. Just if he's in the background or something, you know?
And we
carrying trees or whatever.
How terrible Azkaban is, I think. Like, we know
Yes.
why that matters so much. And yeah, his whole
and that celebration.
Yeah.
When he comes back at the end and everyone's so happy, and it's like, did we even get where he went? I mean, he was in a jail, like, you know, that piece, I think.
Which would have
get more of that in book
for
3.
the next movie too, like how serious Azkaban is, which they knew. They knew that.
Serious for serious.
They did at that point. That's true. The other thing I would just say is some accuracy stuff. So, like, in the Quidditch scene, when the bludger is trying to smash Harry still, you know, and Hermione runs up and she yells Finite Incantatem at him, and it explodes. That spell does not blow things up. All right, that spell removes whatever spell was already on it. It should have just fallen to the ground. And so I was like, oh, shoot, there's an exploding thing spell, and we got to use that one more often. Why didn't we use that in all the battles? Anyway, that was my last one of something that would have been easy for them to fix. Just accurate spells, people.
For these first 2 movies, as much as we love Chris Columbus, and, like, I do think they do well, but it's both of them I feel like are really good at hitting moments in the books, hitting chapter by chapter beats, but not really getting the subtext and, like, planting what needs to be paid off later from those things. So it's like hitting them, but there's no thought to, like, well, maybe we should do this just in case for the future. Or, you know, like, they kind of just make sure they touch it and show it and then move on real quick.
Here's one thing they seed in this one that doesn't really pop up, or they do in this movie and the next, is they kind of have a little Hermione Ron moment, as they do in the third one, although I don't think that's as effective. I'm actually interested to rewatch that one because it is going to be a very jarring director change to watch these back to back and be evaluating it from that point of view. I'm sorry, I have the movie on in the background, and there's so many staircases. Like, Hogwarts is not 75 floors tall. Anyway, my last thing I'm going to bitch about before we move to the what to change is the guy who plays Justin Fletchley has the most punchable face in history. And remember, him and Ernie are so annoying that all those nice things that we said about Hufflepuffs, they kind of ruined. I'm like, it does seem like they just put the little randos in Hufflepuff. Like, maybe we should all evolve to be Hufflepuffs, but they're going to devolve because, they're so annoying. And then, what's her name? Hannah, whatever. Abbott, like, doesn't ever do anything. She's just, we got to name check a female in Hufflepuff. Yeah. She is the DEI hire of Hufflepuff. I don't. Anyway, the dueling sequence, I will say, even in the book, is kind of forced. It doesn't make a ton of sense the way the whole Gilderoy and Snape thing, although it's kind of funny to see them at odds and the way it all goes down. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. It is used as a plot device.
Gilderoy doesn't know the most simple spell of all time, Expelliarmus.
But it does. It's important because Harry becomes an outcast. We see this especially in this book and book 4 and book, is it 5, where Harry is such a massive outcast because of all those different, and this is the first time we see it. And I think that's kind of an important part of his development, and they need to make sure it is a development and doesn't feel too repetitive. So it kind of sets the tone for that. But I looked up the guy who played Justin Fletchley, and he has not acted since, but he was in an a cappella group for a couple of decades. And
so it makes it more punchable, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I love it. Perfect. Hey, I love this thing off. I'm pro a cappella. It's awesome.
I don't know where I have it in my notes, but I do wish they would have introduced those side characters a little more and played them up more, because they really add to the fear of Harry, but it's just like, what are you doing, man? Like, it's just like these quick, like.
You know what I think they should do? This is getting ahead of ourselves. So Luna doesn't get introduced until book 5.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted them to hire that actress early and just have her in the background of a couple
scenes. I would love that.
Just the background.
That's my note for later. We're going to talk about that.
That's an
Wait, real quick, though, some of the things they did right. Jamie, what did they do right?
So I have... Oh, sorry. I scrolled up.
Okay. I thought we were out of those already.
Mister, let's try not to be negative. Okay, I love the Burrow. Love the inside of the Burrow. It's our first time seeing, like, a magical home, and what we learn later, there's really no home like it. But I really love the interior of that. That is a lot how I imagined it. A little more even cluttered than I imagined it, but I'm all for that. Love it. I love the moment they add when they're in the car. They like made it more exciting by having the train like come up behind them. I thought that was a really fun movie moment. I'm glad they touched on a lot of go moments. Like Harry even though it was quick, but him talking to the Sorting Hat in Dumbledore's office, Fawkes like exploding, the fact like Ron's wand, which is a big part of because they need at the end for Gilderoy to like knock himself out. But I'm glad they did show a lot of those little fun things from the book, which I think they missed out in the first movie. I thought the shots actually of Harry walking through the hall with and hearing the basilisk were cool. And I do feel like they did spend more time with Harry. Kind of, they actually pushed away a lot of side characters to spend more time with Harry, but I did like kind of an element of that. Dumbledore's office is super cool, not how I imagined it, but I think he did a good job planting that. And even though it changes a little bit, he did kind of plant the overall look of it. And I feel like the pacing was a lot better. And I just felt like overall, the natural movement from scene to scene was better in this movie. And that's why I ranked it higher than Sorcerer's Stone. So that's a quick rundown of my positives.
I do think like this is not my positive necessarily, but when you talk about runtime, I'm trying to think because when you look at the shorter books, I feel like this is the longer runtime. I'm curious what the page to like minute ratio is. I feel like this might be the longest in that sense. You know what I mean? Where they were able to actually stretch out, put more in with the time they had. Because the other movie, the books only get longer, and the movies don't get that much longer. So here's my thing. So I did put for the opening shot of suburbia. I really like that flyover where you get like all the houses looking the same, right? It felt very much like, okay, yeah, we're back in the normal. But then I also liked that we were only in the Muggle world for 8 minutes, right? Like, let's get to the magic. Let's have some fun. The flying car, I also put like the barrel rolls and stunts. It was like, apparently Ron's pretty good at this, flying car thing. He flies it like a fighter jet. And but it felt really magical and cool. The Howler, I think Mitchell already said this, but the Howler, like I always wondered, like how are they going to do that? Like it's just going to be an envelope floating there screaming at people, but the fact that they like animated made it look like a mouth, and I think they did something similar with the Howler later on in the series, and they kind of kept that. So I did like that one. And then I think we also see a little bit of progression in Hermione's character. Like she's getting very fed up with like the bullies and Malfoy. Because come up in Prisoner of Azkaban, she punches Malfoy, and then in Order of Phoenix, she's leading a rebellion against Umbridge and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of cool to see her going from like the little innocent teacher pleasing student to the I'm not dealing with this crap anymore kind of young lady she becomes. And then my last thing I felt like I got right that was kind of cool was the bathroom design. Like I remember as I read that book thinking like, hold on, like a sink moves out of the way and there's enough space for people to like go down, and like what kind of pipes does this building have if you can have this massive snake, which I think is still a problem. That snake is huge to fit in any pipe I've ever seen except for like a city water main, right? And but like I have no idea what actual plumbing would look like in a castle or how they have, but the way they have like this like center column with all the sinks around it and then it kind of pulls out and there's this huge void. Like I was kind of like, oh, that's cool. It actually makes it feel plausible that something could be hidden in a castle where people didn't see it. So
just
those are some of the things. I do think the music was still good.
It's just being behind a sink, like they pull it out, and I don't know. Snakes can, they can swallow really big things, and it's a magical snake. I just thought it could get a little bit smaller. But the pipes thing is a serious flaw that I am just willing to forgive. And I do hate the design of the snake and the CGI of the snake. I think we can do a full redesign on that. But in the bathroom does look good. It's like how the prefect's bathroom in Goblet is not what I imagined, but I actually really like it. And I'm excited for that to be a pool option in the Hogwarts Hotel.
Please keep your clothes on.
Let's move on to, I think we've touched this as we've gone on, but what's the map forward as they make this a season of television? How long should it be? And what are the key elements that are going to need to be expanded for this to be more entertaining and pay off and be less boring and propel us forward a little bit more?
I put 7 episodes, and I think one of those episodes should be a bottle episode that's basically just the flashback scene. I think they should really do like a fleshed out scene where Harry's seeing what Hogwarts used to look like, kind of believing, because he believes really hardcore that Tom Riddle's like a good guy and the head boy and he saves the day, right? And that Hagrid's, bad at that point. So I think we really need an episode where we really get into that. That whole flashback, and when he comes out of it, come back into the rest of the series, I think would be pretty cool. But yeah, I think 7 would be a good number.
I like 7. I put 8, but I get 7. I think just this is like our first little expansion of the world. See a little bit more of Nocturnally, even though we don't see much in the book, but have that. Plant Lucius and Malfoy at the beginning, like in the book, because they cut that from the movie. Just kind of, these are our antagonists right now because the big guy's not around. And then I already said this, more Gilderoy, but I want to see like the Valentine's Day stuff and just him like more of him trying to like take over with his like charm.
You know,
I
a
put in
scene I forget
quotations.
about is he literally makes Harry like act stuff out with him from his books. I
Yeah.
think it'd be funny if every episode we got a moment where he goes into one of his different books and just says something absolutely ridiculous. I think it could be really funny. And it is his whole list, remember, like his book list that they have to buy is
Yes.
so many books long and doesn't seem like they'd be all that useful. And I do wonder if it's now time to seed, like, he was only hired because no one else wanted the job. Like, that needs to be emphasized a little bit more. And then as Lupin comes in, it kind of makes more sense that like it was difficult to get him to come in and stuff. I think that could all be seeded. But yeah, there's lots of little opportunities.
And that's a fun plant for later on to figure out that they think it's a curse. You know, like, well, do they say that the first book that they think the job is cursed or whatever?
I don't
But
think they say it till
I don't know.
later.
Okay,
Because
but
it
I
also
think that's
doesn't
a
really make
fun.
sense because it seems like Quirrell's been there, but now they've kind of retroactively been like, oh, Quirrell taught
Yes.
other things.
That was kind of an afterthought, but it's fun to think about that. And then again, ghosts, here to advocate for the ghosts, but ghosts do play a really important role throughout. And so having Professor Benz give that little history lesson the one time he's interesting. And I think a bottle episode could be the Death Day party, an expensive bottle episode, which kind of takes away the point of a bottle episode. But, you know, it's really just the three main cast and then a bunch of CGI ghosts.
And
Let's
that
do
whole night, you could like then go until it be cliffhung with it looking
Yes.
like Harry is guilty when we know he's not. There's because they do show Harry's detention, and it's just like how we could have spent time, you know, with Harry and Nocturnality. There's all that tension at the beginning in Borgin and Burks and stuff. And we kind of lose, but they do pick their spots to spend moments in that movie. And I will say I think less dialogue feels rushed compared to the Sorcerer's
Yes,
Stone.
I agree.
Look at that.
And I will say another bottle episode could be the Peeves Filch Harry scene where Harry tracks the mud and Peeves kind of Nearly Headless Nick. He thinks Nearly Headless Nick sets up Peeves, whatever. But I think that could be a fun bottle episode, just Harry and Filch kind of in the office and figuring out about squibs, which we'll plant it for later.
They could plant something in there about all the James and Sirius stuff in there, all their records of their wrongdoing. So we know nothing about that. So.
And play up the twins in general too, and all that, because I feel like the twins are way underplayed.
They get nothing to do in this one, yeah. Other than after the car, like it needs to be shown that they're mischievous. They're the ones who would be like, let's do something that's audacious.
Did you have any more?
Yeah, what did you have that you did add, Mitchell?
No, I didn't really have.
I just put more Hagrid. The same thing. I think the twins is in there too. More Hagrid, more George.
I'm trying to remember in the book what happens in the other Quidditch match. Isn't there a second Quidditch match scene? I know one gets canceled at the end, which they do keep, which is interesting. Oliver Wood, I think he doesn't need to be a bigger character, but he has a really great individual scene with Harry and the Sorcerer's Stone. And I think him being like a single-minded jock and then them winning in the Quidditch Cup in book 3, I think that could pay off in a way like that is like Harry being instantly good at flying is a big deal, and they kind of make it a big deal when he catches the Remember All, and then they all of a sudden he's the greatest seeker Gryffindor's ever had. I think that paying off emotionally for him, that being part of his arc, and especially in book 5, that being taken away from him, I think all those little moments are more. And that's the thing is, I think that both bottle episodes you guys said would work fine. I think in Filch's office, if that could just stretch out, if we could just get to know him and feel that awkwardness and that uncertainty, and then, Nearly Headless Nick, I think if they just give him one scene per movie, it pays off in 5 when he has to have a really tough conversation with Harry. And again, that is something I don't want to lose. I think these are more mystery books than fantasy, so I don't think J.K. Rowling truly thought through the ghosts lore and the magic behind it, but I think the emotional tug and pull of Sirius leaving I think is worth just giving more time to the ghosts in this
and
one.
Rowena Ravenclaw in 7, just her, what's the daughter's name?
You could get big actors to come in and be like, you're gonna shoot for a few days each one, and then in this, like the Bloody Baron and Rowena having like a cool flashback chunk of time in the Half-Blood Prince, that could pay off so well.
capture their face, put it on a ghost, that person gets paid to use their likeness, and then they don't really have to actually come in.
Well, so we've talked about this a lot, but like moving into the golden stitch, because I feel like we're already kind of there, right? So kind of like the most critical storytelling decision, I feel like it really comes down to what I said earlier about making those contrived things feel less contrived, right? How do we add like a reason for these things to actually happen? But I think the other piece is just that continuity. Now that we know the whole story, right? When they made these first two movies, the series wasn't out yet, right? They didn't know how the books ended, but now we do, right? So it's like, how can we in book one, how do we have that throwaway line around Sirius Black being his motorbike, right? How do we make sure that like mandrakes aren't just introduced 5 minutes before you need them, right? Because that was the thing that annoyed me a little bit in a few different books, right? Because happens, I think, in every book, like, oh, let's introduce all this new stuff because it's going to apply later. And it didn't always, but I think it's kind of like, hey, how do we bring that into the world, and how do we make this a longer through line so that we don't feel, I don't know, each season or each book didn't feel so like self-contained and like, oh, we're just making this up so that we can solve this problem later. And we've talked about so many of those, so I think there's just identifying that stuff later in the series and what mentions do we need to make in the second season so that it pays off in the fifth with Nearly Headless Nick, for example, right?
They need to make sure they're not picking up and dropping things and seeding them through if they can. Like, I think Dobby's in this one, but he doesn't come back in the fourth film, which really pisses me off. And the one thing they do is they do have Fudge in this one for like a brief moment, which is interesting because Fudge kind of, I think they could do a better job at making it seem like, oh, he's really important. He's the freaking Minister of Magic, and he can come off a bit smarmy, but not quite untrustworthy. And seeing his turn to catering to the politics, I think could be really interesting. So yeah, I think the key in this one is to let the world expand that right amount, and because those seeds, if you've read the books, you know how they pay off, and if you don't, I think they intrigue. I think because like when I first heard about Parcel Tongue, I thought there were going to be more abilities like that. I thought it was like, oh, an inherent thing that only some magical people can do, which we do get with like Metamorph Magi and stuff, but not a ton. I just think introducing these little things and not completely dropping them, like, and the things that they did a good job with, you just want them to continue with. There are a lot of ghosts. I forgot about Moaning Myrtle. We haven't talked about her at all.
Yeah. She's the only ghost that's really
also funny that she was, I think she's portrayed in this by like a 35-year-old woman playing like a teenager in the toilet, which is quite funny. If it works, it works.
Is it the same actress in Goblet of Fire when she's back? Is it the same actress who does it the second time? Someone know?
Does she come back? And I haven't watched that one.
Yeah, remember when Harry uses the... It's
Shirley Henderson, but I thought she did a really good job with the voice.
Yeah, so she did. She was the perfect amount
just annoying enough to be like...
Yeah, she's back in the bath scene in the forest.
Yeah, she teases him and stuff, and it is funny because Harry is kind of like trying to make sure she can't see his balls, which is also kind of a funny little joke randomly thrown in there. One thing I'll say positive about this that again I'm always worried about them propelling to the next one because I think Azkaban is ripe to be a great season of TV and is so different from the other books in a lot of ways. Like the finale is obviously so much less Voldemort based than every other one. I think keeping us intrigued, and part of that is I think they actually made the Chamber of Secrets very different from what I expected, but I think it was pretty cool. I think it was, even though I don't love the snake, a pretty decent action-packed finale. I think a lot of times like Marvel gets this, where in their third act or in their last episode, there's this big battle that just kind of doesn't always live up to the mystery and the drama that's led up to it. I think they need to execute that emotional moment when Harry realizes what's happened and he's been duped by Voldemort and everything. I think that also needs to be done. And I think if they can do that, then people will really be set up and ready for Harry to keep growing up in this world, to keep expanding. And I was also thinking they could do like an after credits, like Sirius Black teaser at the end of season 2 as well to really get us ready for.
Well, you're right, because you come out of season 2 knowing, okay, this is what Azkaban is. And then you know that season 3 is called The Prisoner of Azkaban. It's like, wait, which prisoner gets out of Azkaban? Why does Azkaban matter? Because you're right. So you're right. There could be a really cool teaser there. I do think because we talked a little bit about just the world expanding, which is really important. Like we're taking things to the next level with this next season, right? But also, like, this is our first Horcrux, right? This is where we get introduced to the fact, like, hey, this magical object is not acting like any object. Like, it's not just a book with some memories in it. And I wish we had a little bit more from Dumbledore just being like, this is off. Like, this is worth understanding more or something. because it does come back later. Like, I remember people talking for so long that Joe had let, leak in some interview that, yeah, there's an Easter egg planted in book 2 or a seed planted in book 2 that's going to be really important later. And I remember people guessing for years at what it was. And I don't know that any of us really were close. And so I don't know. It'd be really cool to kind of just get that, like, it ties into that future bigger thing, because it's the end of Voldemort, right?
And I think that's the thing that's cool about Chamber of Secrets, which I think I said at the beginning, is like it plants a lot of things that don't pay off for a long time. And so you don't even think twice about it, which is kind of, it's a fun thing in a book series. It's like, oh, that connects us back to that. But I don't know if it'll be too obvious emphasizing those things, but that they are important. And I think too, with Sirius coming in the next one, is kind of, I don't know, I feel like this movie really lets go of like Harry not knowing anything about his parents or his past. Like, it's not mentioned really at all, besides at the very beginning where he's looking at that book. So maybe just putting more of that stuff in to get you ready for the next book, which is really about Harry learning about his dad's past and like meeting his friends and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think overall for me, my golden snitch is just like planning things that are going to be important and playing up the side characters more so that we can develop more, and you'll have more time to do that in series, and probably more time than they even had to in the books, which
I think that could just make it much more entertaining as we go through these difficult things with Harry, to be investing in these characters, finding things out about them before we might have even thought we were going to. And then I just want to go back quickly to the idea of Harry still feeling really new to the wizarding world and not knowing about his past. It's interesting because we don't even learn like what a Death Eater is until book 4, right? And there's so many things we don't know that I almost wonder if they could plant in little ways. And again, after book 3, the books always start away from Harry's perspective, don't they? Or do they not do that in the 5th?
The 4th, it starts away from Harry's perspective, right?
Yeah, the 4th and 6th and 7th. And I think when we come back to Harry, like we said, we need to reset him at the Dursleys. But I like how in the book she kind of emphasizes that in year 5, he's like, oh, I still don't know about these things that wizarding people would have grown up with. Even into book 7, when they learn about the beetle and the bard, he's just like, these are part of growing up in a culture that I don't understand. They could have emphasized that more in this one, whereas he kind of comes back and he gets right in, and we're just with him having this troublesome mystery through the whole movie or book.
No, that background context is so important, because it may not even be Harry getting it, because there's certain things he can only absorb so much, So I get that, but I always did wonder, like, why did he never ask more questions about like his parents or like who were their friends?
Why isn't there like a
he never heard the name Remus Lupin before he met Lupin. It's like, well, hang on a second. So I do wonder if we can find that out through another adult or something too, though. If there's a way for like Molly and Arthur to be having a conversation or something where we get some tidbits about James had his friends and some are still alive, went into Azkaban. Some things like that. So there's all this background stuff from the last 10, 15, 20 years that really matters, and that's going to be important further down the line.
Well, and I think, again, a very important part of this is the whole mudbug thing, and that, like, is kind of a plant into the Death Eaters and everything. And even if it's, like, maybe when it's, like, Malfoy and adult Malfoy and Arthur fighting, like, maybe if someone just makes a comment, like, oh, those Death Eaters, like, adult just says that, maybe Harry doesn't hear it or, like, take it. But you do think, besides like Hagrid having that quick conversation with Harry in book 1, it's like Dumbledore should sit down Harry at some point and be like, this is the history of our world. Like, there were Nazis running around not that long ago. Like, but no one ever does that. And it's like, but obviously then books couldn't, like clue in. But I do feel like there also is that like mismanagement of Harry, which is a part of the story. Is that like people assume other people have told him, or people are protecting him from information. And so that's something that will be played up in later seasons, but it is kind of funny to me. I'm like, maybe we should have just told him about this part, or the kids in general, that there's a snake in the pipes. I don't know. Even though they weren't sure about that.
Should have filled him in. Jamie, is the tortoise still near you?
No, I walked over that way. But it just scared me because I saw something move out the corner of my eye, and I was like, oh.
Jamie lives in a reptile house.
I'm at my sister's house, and she lets her tortoise roam, okay?
Like a roaming tortoise to keep you on your toes. Yeah.
Well, when something moves out the corner of your eye, basilisk. Just kidding.
So next week, we're going to be doing some fan casting. We expect to hear casting news soon, but who knows if it'll just be like Dumbledore and the trio or something. I don't think we're going to get these substantial things. And of course, we won't know later books for a long time. But next week, we're each going to bring fan cast ideas of our own, and we'll go over some of the popular ones that have been going around on social media and just speculate a little bit more what different actors can bring to this one. And then the week after that, we will hit Prisoner of Azkaban, which I'm going to come more prepared. I'm going to get ideas really organized with the outline, and I'm going to be more positive. That's my goal.
I am not. I will.
Oh, no.
I feel like I was pretty positive about this one. I have a hard time with the movie Prisoner of Azkaban, and I know that's controversial because that's a lot of people's favorite movie, and I'm disappointed by it.
Good. We can swap roles for the next one. Did you guys have any closing thoughts on Chamber of Secrets?
No, I think like everything else, just don't overemphasize the wrong stuff or underemphasize the wrong stuff, or else we'll mutiny. So give that to the showrunners.
Walk the fine line. All right, for Stephen and Jamie, I'm Mitchell, and we've been here podcasting Muggles, and we'll be back next week to talk about some fan casting.
Check out our social media.
Give us a follow, like and subscribe on YouTube, rate us on iTunes, wherever you get your podcast, we're there. And if you're on social media, we're at HPTVPod. I can't even talk. And our email address is hptvpodcast@gmail.com.